Now, attachment theory is something you've probably seen online. You may have read about it. It sounds intellectual, doesn't it? But it's not. It is a simple framework backed by decades of research that is going to help you better understand how you and the other people in your life show up in a relationship. And that's exactly what I want to help you do today. I want you to have better relationships. Why? Because you deserve better relationships. I mean, wouldn't it be amazing to have a whole group of friends where you could just text them whatever you're thinking or feeling? You don't have to rewrite it 55,000 times. You don't have to worry about whether or not they're mad at you. Wouldn't it be wonderful to show up in your married life or your dating life and not feel insecure or not feel like you can't trust people? Wouldn't it be awesome to feel so secure, so deserved that you are such an awesome person, that you know exactly how you want to be treated? Wouldn't it be amazing to let love and compliments into your life? You better believe it would be amazing. And the way that you do that is you learn how to improve your relationships. Not only your relationship with yourself, but your relationship with absolutely everybody you interact with. And that's where attachment theory comes in. When you understand your attachment style and you understand how to become more securely attached, you will have a better and happier life. Full stop. You're going to feel safer, more secure. And this is the part I love the most. You'll be able to show up absolutely anywhere with anybody and be your full self. How freaking awesome does that sound? Now, it's interesting because I didn't really understand attachment theory until recently. And now that I've learned a lot about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, my husband Christopher and I have basically been talking about attachment theory for 2 years in our marriage counseling every week because we have totally different attachment styles. I also know that a lot of you that are in your 20s right now are reading that book Attached because it became super popular during the pandemic. Our daughters who are 23 and 22 are reading it. And I know that you've seen attachment theory, or maybe you've discussed attachment theory with friends or your therapist. But today, guess what? Everybody is invited to this conversation because we are going to get every one of you up to speed so that you understand yourself, you understand your attachment style, you understand attachment styles in other people, and more importantly, you can use absolutely everything that you learned today to improve your relationship to yourself and others. So, how are we going to do that? Well, I have tracked down one of the world's leading experts on attachment theory. Her name is Dr. Marissa Franco. She's a psychologist, a professor at the University of Maryland. She's also the New York Times bestselling author of the book on attachment styles and how they impact your friendships. That book, it is called Platonic. And don't you worry, I'm going to put all her information in the show notes, just like always. And that's important because it's not just your romantic relationships. You're about to learn that attachment style impacts every relationship, your friendships, your work colleagues, your family, yourself, because attachment style is all about you and how you show up in relationships. And that's why it impacts everything. So let's get you feeling secure and get Dr. Marissa Franco on the line, people. Dr. Franco, I am so excited that you're joining us. Thank you.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
In your work, you describe 4 attachment styles. And so the first one is secure. What does that mean?
Secure, you are comfortable giving and receiving love. You trust that other people love you. You can bring up conflict very level-headedly. Your skill is really perspective taking. When something happens in your relationships, you are thinking about the other person's needs and your own and how to balance both of your needs. You tend to be a really good friend. You're more likely to initiate friendships, less likely to end friendships, more likely to maintain them. Very comfortable being vulnerable, but in a flexible way. Whereas anxious people, you'll see them be vulnerable, vulnerable, vulnerable. Other people aren't responding and they're still pushing vulnerability, where secure people are like, if you're not responsive to this, I'm going to become less vulnerable. They tend to look for relationships with other people that are healthy, right? Because their assumption is that I'm lovable and I deserve to be loved by other people.
So at the basis of somebody with a secure attachment style, you have an assumption that you are lovable and that you deserve to be loved.
Yeah, it's
And
kind of like you're on your own side, right?
is
Like
there
you're
anybody on the planet like that? I just, can you introduce me to them? I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
Because it feels like that's a very whole and safe and healthy human being.
Yeah. And attachment is a spectrum, right? So nobody's fully secure, just like nobody's fully anxious or nobody's fully avoidant.
So the second one is anxious. So can you tell us
Anxious.
what an anxious attachment style might be?
So your core fear is that everybody's abandoning you. You tend to see rejection even when it's not occurring. Like a friend is like tired and you're like, oh my God, they're rejecting me. They hate me. Or a friend has taken a little longer to respond to you, right? You don't consider other people's circumstances when determining how they're treating you. You just take everything personally. At the neurological level, research finds that your amygdala, which is the part of your brain associated with stress, is more sensitive. It lights up
Mm.
more than people of other attachment styles. Um, you are, kind of passive aggressive in conflict. You are very self-sacrificing until you sort of blow up because you can't take it anymore, right? Your relationships just tend to be kind of unbalanced. It's you giving, giving, giving until you can't anymore. And then you sort of just pull away. You're not very flexible. You can be kind of controlling again, because like I spoke about earlier, you need other people to soothe your emotions. So when someone is doing something and you feel triggered, you almost have to try to control them to get you to soothe your own emotions. So
Mm.
anxiously attached people, they're like kind of avoidant towards themselves. Like their internal dialogue is like, I'm too much, these feelings aren't okay, right? They very much invalidate their own feelings and emotions, which is part of the reason why they really need other people to validate themselves.
You basically just described me. I don't know if you knew that this was a therapy session for Mel Robbins, but Dr. Franco, we just have a diagnosis now. Let's talk about the third attachment style, avoidant.
Yeah. So avoidant people, they fundamentally don't trust others. They think if I get close to you, you are going to harm me. So they don't get close to others. They don't initiate as much. They're more likely to end friendships, more likely to ghost on others, not as emotional, very struggle so much with vulnerability, not only in themselves, but other people. Like if you're vulnerable with someone who's more avoidant, they might pull away from you, right? In relationships, it feels like there's a dance with them where you feel like you're getting close to them, and then all of a sudden they sort of back away. They tend to ignore problems, they minimize them, they ignore conflict, they talk like everything's always okay. And why are you making a big deal of them? Like they have this assumption that people shouldn't have needs, both them and other people. And so when it comes to friendship, they're sort of like low effort and low reward. They don't put a lot of effort into their relationships, and they also feel very disconnected from other people.
Hmm. And then you said there was a fourth one. It's not quite organized, meaning that the style is the style when it comes to connection or like trying to connect, but that it's this fourth one that's a little bit more disorganized, you said. So can you explain a little
Yeah.
bit more about that one?
Yeah, so this disorganized, it's people that have really grown up in more extreme situations like abuse. And so they have to sort of pull out the whole toolbox of strategies to try to find safety. So it's sort of like they kind of flip between anxious and avoidant depending on how you're interacting with them. Once you get closer to them, they all of a sudden might become avoidant and feel a sudden need to very much withdraw. It's like they feel this duality. Like, I really want to connect with people, but I'm also so petrified of connection. And it puts them in a bit of a freeze state. Like, there's this feeling that I'm kind of like paralyzed. I don't know what to do in this relationship. I don't know whether to come close or to pull away because I have both of these needs that feel so strong within me.
Why, Dr. Franco, do attachment styles matter?
Mm. Yes. So our attachment style really impacts how we give and receive love, and thus our ability to build healthy relationships with other people.
Wow. Does everybody have an attachment style?
Yeah, we all have an attachment style. It's basically like we all come into new relationships which with a set of assumptions, and those assumptions define our attachment style.
Okay. So, can you give me We know that the 4 attachment styles we've already talked about: secure, avoidant, anxious, and disorganized.
Disorganized, yeah.
Can you give me 4 signs of each attachment style?
Sure. Yeah. So let's think about this practically in our relationships. If you're with someone securely attached, you set a boundary with them, they accept the boundary. They don't try to push it, change it. They don't suddenly pull away because you set that boundary. If you're with someone securely attached, they're comfortable being vulnerable. You'll see that they're being vulnerable with you, but almost in a more reciprocal way. Like they'll be vulnerable, they'll wait for you to be vulnerable back, then they'll be more vulnerable. Whereas someone avoidantly attached really won't be able to be vulnerable. If someone is securely attached, they can address you directly, but not confrontationally. So let's say this is in a friendship context, right? Where, it feels like the friendship has been one-sided. The securely attached friend will say, I love you. I want to be close to you. And I've noticed I've been the one reaching out and that's been hurting me. And I want our friendship to continue. So I figured I'd bring this up. So those are some signs of securely attached people. Anxiously attached people, their core fear is that everyone will abandon them. So you can tell what someone's anxiously attached when they're almost like willing to give up their sense of self to be in relationship with other people. So they're like hyper accommodating often until it really blows up and then they become the opposite. When it comes they anxiously attached people because they fear abandonment, they're not necessarily good at setting boundaries. So they might agree to things and then it seems like they're resentful about it. We talked about, egoistic giving, that they're generous oftentimes to get people to like them. They're attracted to relationships with people that don't seem to like them very much because they've learned that they had to earn love. So you'll see an anxiously attached person having these friendships with people or these relationships with people that kind of mistreat them because that makes them motivated to earn love. And that's what they learned about love, that it's something that's earned, not freely given. Um, and then avoidantly attached people, you'll know they're avoidant because they're they're never vulnerable. You don't feel like you really know them. When you maybe do have a moment of intimacy and closeness, they suddenly pull away and you're like, what the heck is going on? They have a lot of shame, but they don't really admit to it. So they're really struggle with things like apologizing. Whereas anxiously attached person is going to over apologize. The avoidantly attached person is going to say, no, this is not my fault. This is kind of your fault. They just don't tend to put much effort into their relationship. So if you feel like, man, this person, I'm trying to connect with them, they're not really meeting me there, and that person might be more avoidantly attached. Like I can't get them to like try. They're not really trying. That might be a sign of avoidant attachment. That being said, of course, attachment is not stagnant. In different relationships, we can have different attachment styles based off of the attachment style of the other person. So, it's hard to say based on your interactions with one person what their attachment style is.
What about somebody who's disorganized? What are some of the signs that you're kind of in a relationship or a friendship with somebody who has a disorganized attachment style?
Yeah, so the disorganized attachment style is it's not organized, right? So it feels like chaos. Sometimes they want you to get really close, sometimes they're pushing you away. Um Sudden withdrawal. They're they're they have trouble regulating their emotions because their relationships have not helped them do that in the past. People have not validated their feelings. So you might get more escalation, more anger. They might be interpreting your actions with a lot of negative intent, like you're going out of your way to harm me, to kind of destroy me. And so it'll kind of feel chaotic. Like you kind of will be like, what is going on? Like I thought we were just connecting, and they have a kind of very different interpretation of the situation. And usually with a disorganized attachment style, there's a history of a pretty brutal background, like a
Hmm.
history of some sort of abuse in childhood.
Is it easier to spot someone's attachment style in yourself or in somebody else?
You know, one way that I hear other people's attachment style is like how they perceive other people. So, the the insecure attack with anxious people, you hear them say like, all my relationships are fragile or everybody's going to kind of abandon me. And the avoidance, you'll hear them say nobody can be trusted, right? And when you have this one template about everybody, it's a sign that it's not actually everybody because you're not actually discerning each person. You just are coming in with this understanding and superimposing it onto the present, which is what attachment style is really. Um, so when I hear someone secure though, they always try to give people the benefit of the doubt while having boundaries. So they'll say things like, I had to love that person from afar. And they can admit that
Mm.
even when even though we didn't maybe like when they talk about their exes, there'll be some complexity. Like it didn't work out for this reason, but I like them for this reason instead of like my ex was, just evil. So you'll hear that complexity with securely attached people and you'll hear them trying to be as loving as possible to people while also having them recognize what they need for themselves. So kind of both things. There's just more nuance with securely attached people and avoidant. I'm sorry, I'm answering your previous question, but I'm realizing so I have so many more thoughts on this. Whereas avoidantly attached people actually have memory issues because they block out their emotion. If you ask them to talk about things, they are not very expressive. Like it's hard to get them to describe things. It's hard to get them to describe what they think or what they feel because our emotions are big indicators of what we think and feel and our opinions in our internal world. So it'll almost feel like, with someone avoidantly attached, it's like, yeah, the conversation is maybe when it's specifically when you talk about relationships, the conversation doesn't go as deep. Whereas anxiously attached people, their memory, they tend to misremember things and remember things as more negative than they actually were. So
Mm.
that's really interesting quirk, attachment theory and memory. But back to your major question, which was, is it easier to recognize in yourself and someone else? Honestly, I think anxiously attached people tend to be so hungry for information as to how to improve. So when I talk, anxiously attached people are ready, they follow up with me and they're like, that's me. Like, I'm anxiously attached. I cling. I'm so afraid everyone's going to abandon me. I think everybody's judging me. So I think often anxiously attached people, they hear, the basics of attachment theory and they kind of, quickly see themselves in it. That's not happened to me as much with avoidantly attached people. Again, they struggle with vulnerability. So I imagine it would be harder to say I'm avoidantly attached and I've had these struggles in the past.
So
Avoidant,
if I have a
yeah,
question about that, because that's
sure.
fascinating. If you are avoidantly attached and you're listening to somebody talk about attachment theory, given that somebody that has an anxious attachment style might immediately self-diagnose, might immediately see themselves, an avoidant attachment style person likely to experience as they're learning about attachment styles and
Mm.
considering themselves as they're listening to you, Dr. Franco?
Yeah, discomfort. When you get deep with avoidantly attached people or you try to get them to acknowledge some of their wounds, they feel very uncomfortable with that and will kind of maybe they'll stop listening. Honestly, I mean, this obviously depends. And honestly, there's some research that finds that if you're in a relationship with someone who's avoidant but has humility, there's a lot better outcomes. Whereas if the avoidant person is like everything's your fault and I'm fine and you're being sensitive and right, then it's going to be really hard to connect with that specific form of avoidant attachment. But so there has to be, with an avoidant attachment, a willingness to to look at yourself and to be conscious of your patterns, which I think anxiously attached people tend to be more willing to do. If you're having conflict with an avoidant person, often they are just stonewalling or they're
Mm.
ghosting or they're minimizing or they're saying like we're not going to talk about this. Like basically anything related to relationships and intimacy really scares and overwhelms avoidantly attached people. Like, sometimes we think of anxiously attached people as more sensitive in that they get really overwhelmed when a relationship's not going well. But so do avoidantly attached people. They just express it. They express that sensitivity through removal. Like it's they can't they're so overwhelmed emotionally by relationships, by intimacy. And so they're stonewalling, which is a sign of being emotionally overwhelmed. They're being closed off, they're being dismissive because it's too emotionally overwhelming to look at some of their own patterns because fundamentally, avoidantly attached people have a lot of shame. If you tell them they've made a mistake, they have this core belief that I am a failure, that I am deficient. They probably won't admit that to you. Right. But anytime you try to offer a critique to an avoidantly attached person, that you might trigger that core wound of I'm a failure, I'm deficient, which is why it can feel so hard for an avoidantly attached person to hear some of their patterns and hear some of their dynamics.
We're talking about what I've learned in the last couple years about marriage. And my husband and I, as you now know, have been married for 26 years. We've been together for 28 years. We started seeing a marriage counselor, a therapist, whatever you call him. He's amazing. Dr. Cooper. I love this man. Thank you, Dr. Cooper, if you're listening. I want to share with you kind of 6 observations that I have from my personal experience about why it matters, why it's important to work on it, and what you need to do if you do want to repair a relationship that's broken or you want to improve and continue to grow together. So, the first thing is you have to be intentional and say to yourself, I am going to turn this around. I'm going to make it better. Because there's no half assing your marriage. You have to decide to make it better. Wishing it were better is what you're already doing. And it's very different than committing to make it better. Nothing in life is going to change until you make a decision to change it. And then you have to schedule in what you're doing with your partner to change it. And see, I look at marriage as this sort of like living thing. It's like a container in which you and your partner either grow or you wither and dry. I know that sounds like brutal and dramatic, but it's true. And if your marriage or your friendship matters to you, make it a fucking priority. It's really simple. If you want anything to grow, I mean, this is common sense. You got to care for it. You have to tend to it. You got to water it with kindness, with interest, with support. You have to tend to both your and your partner's ongoing growth. I mean, it's critical to your marriage. And I've said this a bazillion times, and I'm going to keep reminding you our marriage is not perfect. It's not the ideal. It is ideal for us. And I've already shared with you that there were years that are wonderful, where we were wonderful to each other, where we were together all the time and investing in each other's growth and growing together. And then there are those years that sucked. We caused each other a lot of pain. And I want you to view the painful stuff in a relationship like weeds in a garden. Over time, if you're not careful, those weeds, they fucking take over. So do not ignore the little shitty stuff because weeds, they start out as this tiny little thing. And then have you ever noticed you like go away from your garden for a couple days and it rains and then the sun comes out and these teeny little weeds are like 5 feet tall? That's the little shitty, irritating stuff. Talk about it. Ask for what you need. Clear the air. Do not harbor resentment. And I'm telling you, therapy, if you can afford it, get yourself to therapy. It is a gift. You know, Chris and I were already talking to an individual therapist, but that's not working on your marriage, by the way. That's working on yourself. And you should work on yourself. But it wasn't until we came together and made it a priority that things really started to shift. And one of the things that I love about talking to a therapist is that for me, I get more out of a 45-minute call with a therapist. We have never met our therapist in person. We do the entire thing virtually. But hitting the pause button every other week to truly unpack something that happened between the two of us, listen to one another. That's the hard part for me, I'm learning. To learn about one another. This is better than any damn date night could ever be. Because we're not just like going out and having time alone, we're actually investing in our growth. That's very different than having a steak and a bottle of wine. Like we're digging out the weeds in our relationships so that things can blossom and bloom so that when we do go out for that meal and you know that night out, it's actually more than just a dinner date. It's something that has real depth to it. So for you, you know, if you can't afford therapy, I totally get it, but I totally understand. I have been in that place in my life. There are free online courses you can take together. There are books that you could read together. In fact, the episode that we just released, Dr. Nicola Pera, her brand new workbook, How to Meet Yourself, is a guided journey through knowing yourself better. You could use that. $25. Use that to make your marriage better. So there are things that you can do if you get intentional. So, number two, this is also something that is critical. It seems like common sense, but you got to do it. You got to develop a genuine sense of interest again in the person. You were interested when you first met them. Remember that? But I bet along the way, you started to decide, oh, I know everything I know about this stupid person. Ugh, there they go again. Eye roll. Well, in therapy, I learned a lot about Chris that I didn't know. And I'm going to say it again. In therapy, I learned a lot about my husband that I didn't know. And I'm talking 24 years into marriage, things that I didn't know. I'm not talking about deep, dark secrets. I'm talking about the way that his thoughts and his feelings impact him. And like, for example, I had no idea how traumatized Chris was by his childhood because it wasn't like anything horrific happened to him. And his mom is one of my closest friends, but he was a latchkey kid. His parents were always working. His brothers were way older. Nobody was ever around. And so it was this sort of slow death march of isolation and feeling constantly alone. His experience was when I get home, nobody's there. When I play baseball, nobody shows up. That if I ask for something, I get teased. Nobody listens. So he stopped asking. In fact, he stopped asking to such a degree that he used to have a nickname in his family. When he was little, you know what they called my husband? The Monument. You want to know why? Because he didn't talk for 2 years. And everybody laughs about it. It was like some big joke. And the truth is, it's actually really sad. I mean, they laughed about it because nobody knew any better. And because he was just a little kid that felt like he was unseen and wasn't worthy of love, his needs didn't matter. He didn't know how to ask, or it just shut him down even more. And so I learned that part of the reason why he never asked for anything is because his experience growing up is that nobody gave a shit. And that helped me go from being annoyed at how quiet he is to really wanting to help support him. Because the fact is, he isn't the most effusive person. He's not the hardy har har guy. He's a deep thinker. And being interested, yes, it means be interested in somebody's hobbies. Be interested in what happened to them. Be interested in what they're saying. But it also means be interested in learning more about them as a human being. And we're all guilty of assuming we know someone just because we've known them for a long time. So, starting today, here's how you can apply this. Assume, starting today, that you don't know a lot about the person that you're with, that there's a whole part of them to discover. And I'm not talking about some deep, dark secret. I'm just talking about how they feel, how their childhood impacted them. Just think about yourself for a minute. When I think about how much I've changed, my God, in the last 4 years, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, I've lived that in my own mind and body. Unless you talk about it and listen to each other, you're not going to know that. I can give you another example of how little we know about each other. So, when I was hosting this daytime talk show, we did an episode where Chris was on, and there was this like marriage expert relationship person. And Chris revealed on national television that when it comes to being intimate, he prefers to have sex in the morning. I had been married to the guy for 22 years. I had no idea that's what he preferred. So you're not going to really get connected to someone unless you're interested in learning more about them. So ask more questions, be more curious. And that interest also means be loud and celebratory. I've been working on this. I mean, Chris, as he's leading his men's retreat called Soul Degree, I'm cheering for him. As he is pursuing a master's in spiritual psychology, I am rooting for him. As he is studying and getting a certificate to be a death doula, I am like clearing the schedule, making sure he's got time to do that. As he is pursuing a certification to do integration therapy for the new psychedelic modalities, I'm like all in. Him feeling supported and celebrated, that makes him know that I'm not only interested, but that I love him enough to be supportive in the things that he wants to do. And of course, he is cheering loud for me. And this isn't just obvious, this is also researched. Celebrating and sharing wins is critical. It's probably one of the reasons why you're roommates. You need to start pointing out what's going right instead of griping about the shit that's going wrong. Researchers from UCLA discovered that the single most crucial factor in tightening or destroying a bond that you have with your partner is how you react to good news in one another's lives. How you react to good news, based on research, way more important than how you react to any bad news. And here's why. You see, researchers found that celebrating your partner gives your partner an emotional lift. Whereas playing down big news, like, oh, that's okay, it leaves a lasting chill. And so you can start implementing that practice immediately. The next time your partner has something good happen, big or small, celebrate that shit. Show them how proud you are. Give them a high five, hug them. And if they don't have something amazing going on, freaking call it out. Thank you for taking the dog out. Thank you for doing this. The small things really matter because when they're ignored, those small things become weeds and resentment that grow and that separate the two of you. Now, the third thing, we did an entire episode on this. I call it Get on the Fun Bus. I'm serious. In therapy, one thing that I said over and over to Chris is this: our life is too serious, man. I am so sick and tired of talking about all this serious shit. I am tired of the problems. I am tired of just feeling like life is a grind. We need to have more fucking fun. And the thing about fun, and we talked about this on the episode about having fun with your family around the holidays, is you're not having fun unless you plan to have fun. I think we all make the mistake of thinking that, oh, fun has to be spontaneous. No. When you were little, your parents planned all the fun shit you did. And so you got to get serious about inserting fun again. In fact, I want to share a story with you. This is how important this is and how this simple concept infuses a dead relationship with new energy. It infuses that roommate syndrome that you may be feeling with this new rhythm and fun that can happen. You know, instead of that slow quitting, you can pick up the fun again and start to reinvest in each other. And I'm telling you right now, the more that you can bring fun back into your relationship, just like you did when you were dating in the beginning. Remember those days? There's a reason why dating is fun because you're planning fun things to do. Just this past weekend, we had flown from southern Vermont to Northern California to go to a business meeting. And we had 90 minutes before we had to get to the start of this business meeting. And as we're driving from the San Francisco airport, I'm like, oh my God, have you ever seen the Redwood Forest? I think Muir Woods is right here. Neither one of us had never been there. So we pull off the highway. It is 4:15 at night. The Muir Woods National Forest is closing in 45 minutes. There is a dark, looming rain cloud coming, and it looks like it's about to rain horizontally. We drive straight to Muir Woods with 30 minutes to spare. We were the only ones there. It was so fun. And there were this dark, cloudy sky, so it felt like we were in a Hobbit movie. We hadn't planned it. It was so fun. And it reminded me we need to do more of that. So, the fastest way to create more energy, go see a great movie, go exercise or hike together, take dancing lessons, cook something new, check out a concert, head to a theme park, ride a roller coaster, go skinny dipping. It doesn't matter what you do. Do something that you used to do when you were dating. Just make it fun. And what if your partner doesn't want to do any of these fun things? Total bump on the log. All right. Well, when we come back, I have somebody who's struggling with that, and we're going to hear her question next. All right. Welcome back. I'm Mel Robbins, and we're talking about the things that I have learned after being married for 26 years and being in and working with a marriage therapist with my husband for the past 2 years. And so we've covered a couple of them. And now I want to address a question that I am getting a lot. And this one comes from a listener named Jen.
Hey Mel, it's Jen. How do we continue to move forward through the change process with a partner who's not willing to move forward too, or at least encourage you? There's a huge gap coming, and it's really scary. Thanks so much, Mel. We appreciate everything that you do.
I can kind of hear the fear in your voice, Jen. It is scary when you get to a point where you realize that you've grown apart from somebody that you used to know. But first, remember, if underneath all that you still truly love this person and you're willing to work on it, you can absolutely make it better. And it's worth doing the work on. But your question is something that I get a lot. Your partner's not encouraging you, and your partner sounds like doesn't want to do the work. So I'm going to address this, and I want to just make sure that there are two aspects to this question of your partner not wanting to move forward, not wanting to join you, not encouraging you. So there is two situations where that's true, and one of them is not that big of a deal, and one of them is a really big deal. So if you're with somebody that doesn't want to do the things that you want to do. They're not interested in having fun. For example, like let's say my husband really wanted to go to a dude ranch. I personally have zero interest in doing that. I do not want to move forward with that idea. I once went to a dude ranch to celebrate my dad's 70th birthday, and I got bucked off a horse and broke my leg and my tailbone. Not interested in that. However, it is important if you want to go the distance. I believe this so much that you are able to do things on your own and you are supported in that. So it's very different to say that your partner doesn't want to be the plus one in your professional dancing career, or they don't want to be the plus one in your desire to scale Mount Kilimanjaro. That's cool. You should pursue things separately from one another. You should have friends that you go off and do things with. You should have goals and hobbies that are yours alone. But I don't think that's what you're asking. I think what you're asking is what do I do if I want to work on this, but my husband will not go to therapy? My husband will not address the problems. My partner or wife will not do the work. If you're in that situation where you're willing and you love this person and they refuse to go to therapy, it's not going to work. You can go to therapy alone, but you will not be working on your marriage. You'll be working on yourself. And yes, therapy will change you for the better. And it might just change some of your habits and your mindset. So that changes the dynamic in your marriage. But to me, that's really a marriage of enduring. It's a marriage that you're surviving because you're with somebody that's not willing to meet you halfway. And when you're in a relationship and the other person won't work on it, what's going to happen is, and I've seen this happen over and over and over again, is the one person who's willing to go to therapy, who's willing to look in the mirror, who's willing to work on themselves, you know what they tend to do? They work themselves to a new level and right on out of that marriage. That's what happens. Because if you don't continue to grow with somebody, you're going to grow to resent them. And that is a scary place. But my only kind of recommendation is you got to keep asking, you got to work on yourself. And at some point, there will become a time where you're going to say, it's not negotiable. In order for me to stay in this relationship, you have to be able to do XYZ. And if you can't do those things, then I can't stay in this because you're not willing to work on it. And I hope it doesn't come to that. Now, another thing that has made a big difference in our relationship in the last couple of years, bringing us much closer together, is reversing roles. So, this is not some sort of like thing you're going to do in the bedroom, although you can. This is not the thing that I'm referring to, although maybe Chris and I should try that. But what I'm talking about is sort of the default roles that you both play in your relationship. So I used to be the person, and this is probably due to my anxiety, where I was the one that was always planning everything. I would pick the restaurants, I'd set the agenda, I would bulldoze the path forward. Um, and here's what I learned in therapy that in me moving so fast all the time and always taking control, it created two major problems. Problem number one, Chris had zero room to step in and take the lead and take care of me. And the more I just did it, I just took care of it, I just picked the restaurant, da, 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 the more I made Chris feel really concerned that if he tried to do those things, I wouldn't like what he did. And so my busyness, my proactiveness, my anxiety about it, my just get it done, get it done, get it done, get it done, it literally made his silence and his thinking worse because there was no room for him to do anything. And second, and here's where the real kicker came, I started to feel like everything was always up to me and that if I didn't do it, nobody would do it. And, it's funny because this dynamic that I created because of my sort of anxious and go getter nature literally was the reason why this happened. I would do everything and then be like, why the hell aren't you doing something? Why is it always me doing something? And then Chris would go like, well, because you're always doing something and I never have time to do something. And I would like to do something, but you've already done that thing. And so we were just locked in this. We were physically together, but having a massive disconnection in our emotional experience of being together. And that theme showed up over and over and over again in therapy. In fact, when Dr. Cooper said to us, you guys are great at transaction, you're sequestered emotionally. That's exactly what he meant. That you're great at doing all this shit, Mel. And you're great at doing all your shit, Chris, but you're in your own corners emotionally and you're not aware of how one another is feeling. So, how are we changing that? Well, there's a lot of slowing down, I'm learning, when you are changing a relationship for the better. Because what you're really changing in your relationship when you change it for the better is you are breaking apart the old patterns and you are replacing them with new ways of showing up. And so, again, it's like habits that you need to break and replace and a muscle that you need to rep. And so, me personally, I'm working on stepping back instead of just racing ahead full throttle. And I am giving Chris the lead on planning and organizing. I mean, the man does design and lead men's retreats for crying out loud. So, for example, when our anniversary came up, normally I would pick what we're going to do. I would do all this kind of stuff. And, I also noticed that I have this propensity to be like, oh, no, that's okay. You don't have to get anything. Oh, no, 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 I don't need anything. Let's not do presents this year. And then I'd be pissed off that there were no presents. So the poor guy couldn't win. I told you I was the asshole in this relationship. So I said to Chris, why don't you just take the reins? Don't even tell me what we're doing. And it was incredible. He surprised me and booked this place that was literally less than an hour away from us in southern Vermont. We took a few days off to just unplug and eat phenomenal food and sleep without the dog waking us up at 5:30 in the morning. And Chris surprised me. It was on our 26th wedding anniversary. On that first night with this stunning ring and vows that he had written out. And, the ring was really insane because Chris had not given me a piece of jewelry that he had picked out and bought for me since our engagement ring. I'm going to say that again. In 26 years, Chris had not picked out and given me a piece of jewelry since our engagement ring. I had always pointed things out and told him what to get and again, managed that. And what had happened is a year ago, we were deep in therapy and I was out in Vegas to give a speech and Chris had come with me. And as a lark, one night before we were about to pull into the elevators at the hotel, we walked into this jewelry store and I tried on this crazy ring. And little did I know, Chris had called the store after we left Vegas, got the details, and had a jeweler back home make it. And he had been holding on to it for months, waiting for the right time to give it to me. Now, I, of course, had nothing to give to him. But it was incredible. And, after that experience, I nicknamed him the trip leader because I realized that the moments in life that I feel the safest and the most in love with him are not when he's giving me jewelry, it's when he's the leader. He's blazing the trail when we're hiking, he's setting up camp when we're camping. He is really doing what he does best, which ironically is planning. In fact, he's so good at it, I might never, ever plan a thing again. And one other thing I want to say about that When our 25th wedding anniversary hit, things were so bad between us, we didn't do anything. I mean, imagine making it to 25 years and being in a state in your marriage where you're like, I don't even feel like celebrating. We have so much work to do to find our way back to one another after all the shit that we have been through these past couple years and how far apart we feel from one another and how much resentment has built up. And for him, how much shame and regret. And for me, shame and regret too. That on our 25th wedding anniversary, we didn't do anything. We didn't celebrate. We didn't post about it. We didn't toast. We just let the day come and we let the day go. And so for us to get to a point a year later where he and I have been working hard to truly address the things that went sideways and to hear one another and to be interested in one another's experience and feelings and be interested in showing up and changing, that's what we were actually celebrating. That's why there were new vows. And that's what's possible when both of you are willing to do the work. And so the fifth thing is you got to ask for what you need. It's taken me 20 some years to just ask for what I need. This is a novel idea, but instead of being pissed off at your partner, why not just ask for what you need? It's a lot easier than being angry and annoyed all the time. And I think a lot of us get into trouble. This is that sort of slow, quiet quitting that I was talking about, because we show up in a relationship and we expect our partner to behave the same way we wish they would. And we don't ever fully communicate what we actually need. And they don't ever fully communicate what they need. You know, I gave you the example of us being married for 20 years and me not even knowing that Chris prefers to be intimate in the morning. Never talked about it. Like that's dumb. Why not just talk about it? It just is so obvious. I'll give you another example. I love flowers. I mean, I love, love, love flowers. I have parents that turned a wooded plot of land in suburban West Michigan into this gorgeous, gorgeous perennial garden. And I just love flowers. It reminds me of my childhood. I love taking care of them. I love growing them. And I love buying myself flowers. Nothing makes me happier than going to the grocery store. And if I see a little bouquet of tulips or daffodils, I mean, I'm talking $3, $4. You don't have to like buy the roses. I just love having fresh flowers in my house. And when Chris goes to the grocery store and he buys a bundle of tulips for me, it's like, oh my God, you were thinking about me and you know this about me. It took me a long time to tell Chris that. Do you know what was happening instead? For years, when I would travel, I would take off on a Monday to go give a bunch of speeches. I'd return home on a Friday, like a lot of you do that travel for work, that are road warriors out there. And I would come home, and you know what would be on the kitchen counter when I got home? A vase full of the dead flowers that I had bought for myself that nobody in the family had bothered to pull out of the vase while I was gone. And when I would walk in and see those dead flowers, that was a sign to me that nobody even thought about me while I was gone. Nobody was expecting me to come home tonight. Nobody was excited for me to come home. And so one day I said to Chris, you know, it would mean a lot to me if when I come home from a business trip, or hell, whenever you go to the grocery store, if you just picked up flowers. Because when I see, I'm talking grocery store flowers, people. I'm not talking go to the florist. I'm saying the bare minimum. When there's a little bundle of tulips sitting in a plastic vase on the counter or a mason jar, it makes me know that you're thinking of me. And I'll tell you, that's all it took. Every time the man goes to the grocery store, he returns with flowers, and it puts the biggest freaking smile on my face. So ask. Instead of punishing somebody, instead of quietly quitting, get loud about what you want. And in return, ask your partner to get loud about what they need from you. Don't assume that you know your partner's love language or what they wish that you were doing. Just ask them and start doing it. And finally, this is a big one. Assume good intent. One of the things that I've learned about my husband, Chris, it's been a reminder, really. And this is one of those things that happens when you really slow down and you get present with the person, whether it's your spouse or your partner or a friend, is that my husband's just like, he's just like a really nice guy. There's not a mean bone in Christopher Robin's body. And I get so worked up in my own shit that I forget that. I just forget that he's not out to be an asshole. He's not trying to screw me over. He's not some dickhead that's doing the. He's just a nice guy who's doing his best. And see, I think we forget that. If you deep down still love the person that you're with, but there's all this crap that's built up, find your way to anchor there. Assume good intent. Assume that they didn't mean to use that tone of voice, that they didn't mean to frustrate you, that they didn't mean to fail at whatever they failed at, that they didn't mean. Assume good intent. Remember the person that you fell in love with, because I believe that person is still deep down in there. But any relationship, whether it's a friendship or a family relationship or a love relationship that goes the distance, there's shit that builds up. But the person who they are at their core, that doesn't change. That doesn't change. And so if your response to me saying, assume good intent is, oh, Christ, Mel. I mean, you should, like, and you're starting to make a case about the person you're with, there's your answer. Get out. If you can't even admit that at their core, this is a good person, this is a nice person, then get out, because you're with somebody that's not a nice person. You're more committed to making your case and being right about this than you are about seeing something deeper that's worth working for. And to me, that's the bottom line, because that's what I've learned through these past challenging years and at times very painful changes in years that we've been through. That if you're both willing to look a little deeper and remind yourself of why you loved him in the first place, if you're both willing to look in the mirror and work on yourselves and your relationship, you can work through anything. You really can. You can get through some horrific things. You can get through things that seem insurmountable, whether it is addiction or the death of a loved one or cheating or bankruptcy. You can get through all kinds of things if you're both willing to work on yourselves and your relationship. If you're willing to remember that deep down, you're with somebody that is a good person at heart that maybe lost their way, that your relationship is a living, breathing, organic thing, a place where you're either going to grow or you're going to wither and die. You got to care for it. You got to tend to it. You got to shower it with kindness and genuine interest and support. And please, dear God, can we start having some fucking fun? I mean, let's just stop waiting for another couple to invite you over and start throwing some dinner parties and some dance parties and some playlists and have some fun. Like, maybe it's that we've all gotten a little too serious. Save the serious talk for your therapy sessions and bring the fun to the rest of your life. Bring your inner life to the surface. And I'm telling you, your connection will not only grow, but it will also grow strong. And in case no one else tells you today, I hope that your partner or your friend tells you this, but in case they don't, I'm going to tell you, I love you and I believe in you. And I believe in your ability to create a better life and better relationships. And how about you start putting what I just shared with you to work right now? I've got another one from Maddie. And I know that you had some issues with binge eating when you were a teenager. And so I think you'll be in a very, you're in a really important position to make a difference here.
Maddie writes, I'm 19 years old and my social media feeds are filled with fitness influencers. I enjoy fitness a lot. I love the way the gym makes me feel and the reward of how my body can look, but I get too carried away with my image sometimes and let it control my day and my mood. I struggle with binge eating at night, but I haven't been diagnosed with an eating disorder. Do you have any tips for comparing myself to other people, comparing my body to other people's bodies, and even more importantly, how do I just build a better relationship with myself and my body?
That is a very deep question, and I absolutely can relate because when I was her age, I also struggled. And I think a lot of younger women struggle. One of the things that younger women now that are up against that I didn't have and many of us didn't have is that social media has no rules. So the first thing that Maddie has to do is limit time on social media. And I mean, really limit it to what is she trying to gain out of it. And this is going to take some internal fortitude because it is addictive. And that is how these apps, which we all love, but are designed. And they allow for dopamine release, and we want to keep going back for more. I personally have a lock on my social media. I can spend 30 minutes a day on social media max until I'm locked out. And that is exactly what Maddie should do because comparison is a kiss of death for people. We have no idea what is happening. It really, truly is about being one's best version of oneself and shifting away from the external. Again, this whole conversation hasn't been focused about the external drivers of looking good, but understanding that the better you treat yourself, we only have one body, the better an individual treats themselves from the inside, the more capable Maddie's going to be throughout her entire life. And ultimately, she's going to go through a period where, each decade we compare less, right? Right now, Maddie, you're at the height of comparison. And
So
that's just
true.
also part of being a 19-year-old woman, a 19-year-old girl is you are in the zone of comparison. But this is an amazing opportunity to develop some mental toughness. And what do I mean by developmental toughness? I mean having a lot of discipline to say, you know what? I am not going to go and look at those things and compare whatever it is that those people are doing. And the other thing is I'm actually going to focus on a goal that I set for myself that is not external. It shouldn't be based on external looks. It could be based on, so she said something very important. She said something about the progress in the gym.
Right.
I don't see progress in the gym. Well, what about saying you are going to do 10 dead hang pull-ups? That has nothing to do with how you look. It purely has to do with embracing the discomfort of becoming more skilled at a movement.
You know what? This actually points to the whole reason why I wanted to have you on. Because the reason why Maddie and just about everybody on the planet, particularly in that age group, has trouble with comparison is because they're focused on what they look like versus being in the gym to take care of your muscular health. Being in the gym because of the different amino acids and the way that your neurotransmitters and your thinking and your mood and your mental health are impacted. And one thing that helped me a lot, because I struggled, like everybody, with profound comparison, is if you're going to compare yourself, right? If you just have this habit of looking around and laser focusing in on the one person whose body type is exactly the opposite and genetically impossible for you to ever achieve, and then beating yourself up for the fact that you're not 11 feet tall or 3 feet tall or whatever it is that you wish that you were, if you're going to do that with one person, try for a day admiring everybody. Admire everybody in the gym. Admire the freckles on that person over there. Admire the curly hair on that person over there. Admire the monster calves that person over there has. Admire the gap between the teeth of the other person over there. Find something that you admire that's unique about every person that you pass by, just, casually, and you'll start to notice that you can flip it from this seeking of someone looks better than training yourself to see something unique and beautiful in everybody, because we all look very different. And I think intellectually we know this, but that's a way to start to train your mind to default in a very different way. The reason why I invited Jen on the podcast is because there was something about the way she wrote this initial question. And she had written that, like me, she too had had one of the most difficult years of her life, but she was having a really hard time giving herself credit for facing all that she had been through. And I sensed there was a lot more under the surface here. So, Jen, I want to welcome you to the podcast. Can you start by just introducing yourself and asking your question again?
So my name is Jen, and I am from Pennsylvania. My question is, I have a lot of difficulty giving myself credit, as you suggested that we do, especially this past year, which has been just extraordinarily painful. How can I overcome that?
I love your question. So, why has this last year been extraordinarily painful?
Without getting into too much detail, there was some betrayal that happened in my life, and it's just affected every aspect of who I am. Like I question everything now, like everything I thought I was, everything I thought I could do, like it's all just been ripped away, and I can't overcome it.
You can overcome it. You won't at the moment. And let me give you advice about betrayal, okay? And this is really hard to get. And as somebody who has both been betrayed and who earlier in my life was somebody who was the betrayer, I can speak to both sides of this. And what I want to say, and this is the hardest thing to grasp, it has nothing to do with you. What that person did in your life has nothing to do with you. And it has to do with their pain. It has to do with their neurochemistry. It has to do with their coping mechanisms, their trauma, their dysfunction, their pain. It doesn't make it any easier when you're on the receiving end of it. But when you say and are able to just repeat, it literally has nothing to do with me. This is a very hurt and lost person who is coping with that hurt and that loss in an incredibly destructive way. But in no way, shape, or form does their bullshit determine whether or not I'm lovable, or whether or not I trust people, or whether or not I'm good enough. They have revealed a very broken side of themselves that they have chosen to escape, numb, deflect, all of it, instead of facing it in the mirror. And it's really hard because you got to go through a process of grieving what you thought it was in order to have yourself unhook from it. Because what you're actually grieving right now, and you haven't given me any details, but I'm just going to, talk from my own experience. You're grieving the future that you thought was going to happen, and you're grieving the reality of what you thought was going on. And that's incredibly destabilizing. And so you got to give yourself time, I'd say a year, to really just move through the anger, the pissed offness, the hurt, the how could they have done this? How could I not have seen this? How could they have lied? Like all of it. And then at some point, you're going to hit this like saturation point where you have soaked up so much of the misery that you will no longer want to feel it. And the only thing that will help you, like a sponge, squeeze that shit out of your being, is when you say, wow, I actually feel sorry for that person. I feel sorry that they're so screwed up that their only way to cope with that is to either cheat or lie or steal or whatever, because it's easier than facing the truth. Some people are so scared of disappointment or upset or pain that they are willing to literally drug, smoke, drink, or fuck their way through life. Because the momentary rush of dopamine that you feel when you snort cocaine or you have an orgasm or you're flirting with somebody in secret or you're stealing, that relieves you of the deep pain that you're feeling. That's why people do that. And you were hurt. You didn't deserve it. But I'll tell you what else. You don't deserve, and you shouldn't be in a relationship with somebody who is not willing to face that shit, who is not willing to heal with you, who is not willing to do the work. And so, I'm being tough with you because this person already got how many years of your life?
14.
Yes. And what I want you to understand is that, first of all, any relationship, in my opinion, if two people are willing to do the work, any relationship can come through and be stronger, even in the face of betrayal. No question. But only if both of you are willing to come to the table and do the work together. You to forgive, and the other person to face their shit that led to this. And if they're not, then all you can do is grieve what wasn't, and grieve the future you thought you were going to have, and take a hefty amount of empathy to feel sorry for somebody, that this is who they are, as hard as it is, and at some point to truly, honestly be grateful that all this crap got revealed so that you can move forward with somebody who's healthy. And the somebody I'm referring to is you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that.
And one other thing, even though this has nothing to do with you, when you look across the 14 years, there are probably things that you can see where you let shit slide. Or you didn't say what you really meant.
So I blame myself.
Excuse me, what did you say?
So I blame myself when I look back and kind of assess all of those things. Like I do find things that I have let slide. So then I blame myself for letting it go.
No, it's just a lesson. And sometimes lessons we learn easily, and sometimes we need sledgehammers.
Yeah.
And this is a sledgehammer. And so as you move forward in your life, whether you do so on your own or you do so, working through this with somebody, one of the things to do is not to blame yourself. It's to say, oh, I now know that I will never do X again. I will never do this again. That when I feel a certain way, I won't be silent. When I have a hunch, I won't talk myself out of it. That when I'm being disrespected, I will address it. And that's what you're learning from this. It's one of the 1,000 things that you're about to learn for this. And one other thing I want to tell you is I promise you the road ahead
You got the best years of your life ahead of you. You do. And I think you know that.
I hope so. I want to know that. I want to think that. It's just then I get into my head, and that's kind of where I live.
What's the thing that you say that tortures you the most?
That I'm not good enough. That it happened because I'm not good enough, not pretty enough, not thin enough, not all of it.
How's that feel?
It sucks.
Do you want a different story?
I do.
Great. I'm going to give you one when we come back from the break. Welcome back. I'm Mel Robbins, and today we are coaching listeners who have experienced betrayal. And unfortunately, as you're learning, this is a topic that I have a lot of experience in. And we were just talking with Jen, and I was explaining the fact that one of the most important steps that you need to take is you've got to start telling yourself a different story about what happened. And so here's one, Jen, that I want you to start telling yourself. It happened because he's an asshole who has a lot of trauma, who doesn't want to face it, and who's been avoiding it. And we also know who will likely do the same thing to the next person if he doesn't face it now. Because people who avoid the hard things, the pain they're feeling, or the trauma that they experienced when they were little, when people use avoidance as a coping mechanism, guess what they continue to do? To avoid. And again, this is where it comes down to the fact that this betrayal has nothing to do with you. And I know that's hard to grasp. I really do. But I want you to start to tell yourself the story that this has nothing to do with me. This has to do with his shit. This has to do with him not having the coping mechanism to face his pain. And this is a wake-up call. That's what this is. It has nothing to do with me.
I do want to be clear that he is trying to own his crap. It's just,
Oh.
it's me living in my head. And like, I know that part of me knows that it's not my fault, that it's not that I'm not good enough, and all of the things that you said. It's just like I'm a highly sensitive person. I'm an empath. I'm ADHD, like all of those things. And I just, it's me trying to overcome those things for me.
Then let me give you a different interpretation and a different story. Because you two are trying to work together through this.
Yeah.
Great. And let me tell you why I think that's great. I don't know a single couple that has gone through something horrible. And look, Chris and I have gone through horrible stuff. I don't know a single couple who spends time in therapy and works through it, who doesn't come out on the other side and say, I wish I hadn't worked on it.
Right.
But I do know a number of people that have gotten divorced that wish they had tried to work through it. And so working through it matters, not so you can stay together, but it matters because if you don't stay together, you will be better co-parents and friends. And that's important. But the likelihood is if you're both willing to come to the table, and he in particular is willing to do the work, then the odds are in your favor. And you will come through this stronger. So the story I want you to tell yourself is this. What if he did this because it was the only way he could stay in the marriage? Because he was feeling so lost and so depressed and so whatever, that he was the one who didn't feel good enough. That it's not about you or the other person being thin or whatever else. That he was at a point in his life that he lost who he was.
And he might as well have been having sex with a frickin' dinner plate, for crying out loud, because it's not about the other person. It's about him chasing an old version of himself. And if there's a dynamic in your relationship where he thinks he's failing or he thinks he's not good enough, that's what this is about. It's not about you not being good enough, it's about him not measuring up for you.
Yeah. I like that story a lot better.
And you know what else I like a lot better? That it was sex or an emotional connection and not heroin.
I don't know. I'd kind of prefer the heroin, I think.
Right now you would.
Yeah.
Because we want to make this stuff about us. Of course it hurts you. Of course. It's devastating. And one of the biggest things you will learn from this, if you allow yourself to, is you'll learn that forgiveness only happens when you stop wishing things were different. And that you can love somebody profoundly and at the same time do shit that hurts them profoundly. And that through the act of understanding what happened and really allowing yourself to be in a space where you can hear how broken, hurt, lost, whatever, regretful, whatever the feelings are, you will truly connect with this person at a level you never have. And this is not easy. It will be worth it, regardless of what happens. And the more you tell yourself, this has nothing to do with me. This is about him being broken. It's about him not measuring up. It's about him needing to escape these feelings instead of dealing with them.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of courage on both of your parts to face this. And if you guys can get to a point where you understand what happened and you keep the lines of communication open and you keep going to therapy, you'll have a stronger marriage than 99% of the people out there.
Yeah, I keep hearing that. That's what I'm holding on to.
Yeah, you're on the bridge. I love using this metaphor that all change is a bridge. And this happens to be one that's about as long as the Chesapeake Bay Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a suspension bridge, which means when the winds pick up, it blows. And it will get better. And it will get in the rearview mirror. And by going to therapy together, whether you stay together or it ends up not being what you want, you will have such a better understanding of yourself and an understanding of what happened that you won't carry the resentment and the self-blame because it's not about you. It has nothing to do with you. In fact, in the best of all scenarios, what you're going to learn is that when somebody feels inadequate or that they've failed you, it has more to do with how much they love you. As screwed up as that sounds. Ask your therapist.
Yeah. Oh, I will.
I don't know the details of what happened, but I
Yeah.
just am trying to tell you that if he didn't love you, he would have left.
Right.
And affairs are people searching for parts of themselves that they feel they've lost. That's what they are.
Thank you.
And they're not fair, and they're not right, and you didn't deserve this. And he's very fucking lucky that you didn't just end it. Because you both have a chance to grow from this. And that's a gift. Even though it doesn't fucking feel like one you want to unwrap. You're on the bridge. Just keep crossing the bridge. And trust that when you get to the other side, it's going to be way better than you can imagine.
I hope so. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're going to be okay. Just let yourself feel this shit, dude. Like, that's what you got to do. And the thing that I also want to tell you is, like, when you get pissed, like, write it all out. Like, you're probably past the lashing out part and screaming, but maybe not. I don't know.
For
But
the most part, yeah.
yeah, like, it just allow yourself to be a little human. And now that you're kind of through that part, keep steering yourself toward, okay, how do I understand what happened? How do I create a space for healing for both of us? How do I forgive what happened? Like, that's the North Star. Because whether you stay together, especially if you stay together, but even if it ends, I don't want you to carry this resentment or this lack of trust into what happens next. Heal this for yourself. And if the marriage is the right thing for you, you'll know.
Yes.
Thank you for being so honest with us and vulnerable.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you. You have no idea how much you have just helped me change my life. So thank you.
You're welcome. And you're continuing to do it. And, you know, I think sometimes too, this is happening because you're not supposed to have that kind of shit going on in your life. That as you level up your own standards for yourself, what's amazing is all of the crap that's not working comes to the surface. And that's because you're not supposed to have a life that's out of integrity. That's not what you want. That's not what you stand for. And sometimes bringing things into integrity means a lot of shit comes to the surface and you got to get a shovel.
Yeah.
You are going to be just fine. You're not only going to be fine, you're going to be happy. And you're going to be stronger because of this. And you're going to have a deeper capacity for love. And you are going to surprise yourself.
Yeah. Oh, I have. I already have for sure.
Name one thing that has surprised you about yourself or that you're proud of. Because I want somebody that's at the beginning of this kind of breakdown to hear somebody further across the bridge.
I am very surprised. I had no idea how strong I really am. And you hear that all the time. You know, you don't know how strong you are until it's time to be strong. So honestly, if there is anybody, just believe in yourself. You're stronger than you think. You absolutely are.
Yeah. Is there anything else that surprised you as you've navigated this?
Honestly, my ability to kind of try to be compassionate. Like I've always been, you know, of the mindset, you know, I won't stay in a relationship where there was infidelity. It's just, it's not how I'm going to work. And then you're in the situation and it's completely different than anything you thought it would be.
Yeah.
But just to be able to overcome it, I mean, get like, I know I already said this, but like just the being, I'm so much stronger than I thought. And that's how I get through my days. And like, I grace, grit, gratitude. I say that to myself all day long, just learning to show myself grace, finding things to be grateful for and keeping my head down and just keep going, go to the therapy, do the hard work.
Yeah.
All of the things, grace, grit, and gratitude.
You're crossing the bridge in the fog in a rainstorm.
Yep.
And here's what I also want you to be proud of. You are compassionate
because you have a very deep capacity to love.
Yeah.
And part of loving is also being able to accept and understand someone else. Now, that doesn't mean condone.
Right.
That doesn't mean you're responsible for it. That doesn't mean that you're making excuses for it. But attempting to understand somebody else's pain and bringing compassion to something that somebody is dealing with, even though their dysfunction profoundly broke your heart, that's an act of love. That's why you're going to be okay. Hey, it's Mel. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoyed that video, by God, please subscribe because I don't want you to miss a thing. Thank you so much for being here. We've got so much amazing stuff coming. Thank you so much for sending this stuff to your friends and your family. I love you. We create these videos for you. So make sure you subscribe. Mwah.